This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy this show, as together we hear how they are making their world better. Welcome everybody to the show. There is no doubt that right now, everything feels to be in a constant state of flux. Every day, another headline comes across our media feed, reminding us of how quickly our world is changing. So how do leaders operate within such an uncertain environment? And specifically, how do nonprofit leaders navigate their staff and their organization through these turbulent times? My guest on the show for this episode is David Langiulli, and he will seek to answer how we as nonprofit leaders can lead through a crisis. David is a certified professional coach, a leadership trainer, and a nonprofit board member. He also has a special emphasis on mental fitness and is integrating that into his leadership training. He also helps lead Fundraising Leadership, an organization committed to growing nonprofit leaders, which also has a podcast, which I'll talk a bit more about during the show. Enjoy today's show. Well, David, I'm so glad to have you on the show today. You know, there's no doubt that right now, everything feels to be in a constant state of flux. I mean, every day another headline comes across our media feed, reminding us how quickly our world is changing. So how do leaders operate within such an uncertain environment? And specifically, how do nonprofit leaders navigate their staff and their organization through these turbulent times? I know you recently wrote an article about this, and I wanted to pull out some of the key points you make in that article. So first, you point out that all too human desire to both fix and control all of the chaos we find ourselves in. How do we overcome this temptation and try to fix and control our surroundings?
Well, it's a great question. How is fixing and controlling working for you these days, Rob?
Yeah, not so good right now. Not with COVID-19. Yeah, not so good.
Yeah, that's a great example, right? COVID-19 is currently outside of our control. I've written an ebook on Stoicism, the Stoic way of leadership, and from Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, we learned that there are things that are completely within our control, and there are things that are completely outside of our control, and then there are some things that are partially but not completely within our control. So let's talk about COVID-19. Right now, much of what's happening is beyond our control. There is no vaccine. And there are some things that can be done. We can social distance. We can wear a mask when we go, food shopping. So there are certainly some things that are partially, but not completely in our control. If we catch the virus, we can go see the doctor and see if we can get treatment, because treatments are improving now. So that's just a really good example. But I would say that to get anxious, there's a lot of anxiety around the virus, and a lot of what's happening is just not in our control. So I'd like to say just accepting what is, as opposed to trying to control and fix.
Really good advice, and I think you're right. It's interesting how, I think with COVID-19 specifically, everything that we used to depend on has been really pulled away from us, whether it be connecting with other people, if you're an extrovert, your job, your favorite coffee shop, you name it, go down the list, it was all taken away. Maybe outside of your family, depending if you live by yourself or you live with a, extended family. But leadership again, right? So much of leadership is what we allow into our mind and what we choose to focus our mind upon. And in your article, you talk about sharing 4 key questions that you borrowed from Byron Kate. Could you share those with my audience, and how have these questions been particularly helpful for you?
Leaders in the audience here could actually coach themselves with those 4 questions. Whenever sort of an afflictive emotion triggers a thought like, there's, we're taking unacceptable risk, or whatever the thought is that really tortures you. Usually it's kind of a ruminating type of thought, you can ask those 4 questions. Is this thought true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? Usually people pause there when they really dig and they, can I absolutely know that that's true? They'd be like, no, I can't. But in your case, there's always some risk here. So how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? And that's usually the one landed with you so strongly that you would be a better leader. You would be able to make better decisions. You'd be more at peace without that thought. Like every time you open the door, we're taking a risk. For leaders in the audience, you can coach folks in your organization with those 4 short questions. Byron Katie's 4 questions, very effective. I use it all the time. Yeah.
As I mentioned on the front of the show, you are a coach, and this is what you do. And so for my listeners, I think as we go through today, I think they're going to really want to contact you, which we're going to give an opportunity for people to find out how they can contact you if they need coaching. Well, okay, we're in this crisis, of course. We're in this pandemic. When it comes to leading an organization during a crisis, like the pandemic that, of course, we're in, there are certainly times when leaders need to lead with an urgency, right? And perhaps in the face of fear or uncertainty and stress, as you've already mentioned already, leaders need to harness that right amount of energy and, turn that fear into positive momentum for those that they're leading. And of course, stress comes with the job of being a leader. Even without a pandemic, there's plenty of stress that comes with the job of being a leader. And the larger the organization, of course, often the more stress. In fact, you just can't be a leader of an organization without experiencing some level of stress, because stress just comes whenever you're leading people. So a question for you on that, when it comes to stress and leadership and as you coach people, particularly in the light of the crisis that we find ourselves in, I've learned that there's a doable stress on the one hand, and then there's a destructive stress, right? There's the doable stress is kind of stress we all deal with and we have to just put up with and hopefully have good coping mechanisms. But then sometimes we slip into this destructive stress where we allow stress to get the better of us. And then it ends up in people, leaving their job or, self-medicating or making really poor leadership decisions or treating their staff horribly. You fill in the blank. When you coach leaders, how do you define each type of stress, and how can leaders distinguish when he or she has slipped into that destructive stress mode of leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it is unique for each person how, what triggers our stress levels into that sort of destructive zone. It's different for different people, and in some of the work now that I'm doing with nonprofit leaders around mental fitness, we talk about what are the triggers. We call them saboteurs. Actually, it's the ways we sabotage ourselves. It's the ways that we sort of have an emotional hijack, and things, either circumstances or other people, are triggering our afflictive emotions, and those, when we react as opposed to respond, when we react from a state of stress, often our actions are not so skillful. And we talked earlier about being vigilant. Absolutely, during these times, we want to be vigilant. We want to do what we can do to protect ourselves and our staff and our board members and our donors. Do what we can. But if we get so hyper-vigilant, by way of example, this is one of these saboteurs. When we get hyper-vigilant, we see danger all around. Everywhere we look. And people right now are very much paralyzed. Many people are paralyzed by this hypervigilance. They just, everywhere they turn, they see danger, so they do nothing. Now, you run a humanitarian organization in Utah. How can you possibly fulfill your purpose and do nothing? So this is the way, hypervigilance, you could sabotage the very purpose that you exist on the face of this earth at this time for. So you have to be mindful of these sort of 9 different ways that we sabotage ourselves. Another one is the controller. We were talking about wanting to control and fix everything. Well, usually the impact of wanting to control and fix and organize and make sure everything goes as planned, it can be exhausting, especially when there are many things, especially right now, that are outside of our control. And yet there's this desire to want to control and fix. And that causes a lot of stress. So the first step in relieving some of this, what you call the destructive stress, is to first recognize when you're hijacked by some of these saboteurs, and then shift to what we call more sage-like, a way of being a leader that's more sage-like. And we could talk a little bit more about that if you want. It's a bit more of an advanced topic. But the first step I would say is to notice when you're feeling the stress, ask yourself, what's going on here? Maybe, some people in the nonprofit world, many of them fundraisers, they have what we call a pleaser saboteur. They're trying to please everyone. They're trying to make the circumstances and conditions such that the board is happy and the donors are happy and the clients who are receiving our aid are happy and the staff is happy. Well, how does that work out for you, Rob, when you try to please everyone?
Not very good. Not very good at all.
Right. Not very good. Like, these are just subtle kind of forms of, they all come from a good place. Like, yes, we want people to be happy. We want them to be happy, but there's a common saying, you cannot please all of the people all the time.
Well said. No, you're absolutely right. I think that's one that I would call myself a recovering people pleaser, because it's something that I think I definitely have a tendency towards, no doubt about it. And it can sabotage your leadership, because you're absolutely right. You nailed it. You cannot please everybody. I remember back in the day, and I've forgotten who said this, but a mentor of mine said, you can either choose as a leader to try to please people and please everybody in your organization, or you can choose to be respected. And the idea was that of course, it's natural to want everyone to like you and to please them. But at the end of the day, when you've got the mission in mind and you want to follow whatever mission it is that you're called to lead, then at the end of the day, they'll respect you. Even if they don't like you, they'll still respect you because you stayed mission driven. And I thought, I've tried to. It's hard. It's easier said than done. But
you're a strategy guy, and I know you're very thoughtful. And what happens with, people ask me about strategy over the years all the time. And I'm fond of another saying which goes something like, strategy is what you say no to as much as what you say yes to. So, you were sharing that, you're leading an organization, and I know this about you because we had you on our podcast, and you're doing great work. And, you have a mission. And this is how we get mission creep, is when we start saying yes to, you have some board member that says, oh, wouldn't it be nice to do this? Right? Wouldn't it be nice to do that? I think you have to think very carefully about saying yes to those things. I'm aware, I'm reflecting upon my time at Princeton when I used to sit in on some of the senior leadership, Princeton University, when I used to sit in on some of the senior leadership meetings there. And Princeton as an organization is very careful about, expanding programs, going beyond the core. They do it very thoughtfully, and they say no to a lot of things, even though donors are willing to fund those activities. So I think as a leader, that tendency to want to please can really stretch the organization thin. And you talk about stress. Boy, when you are a small to medium-sized nonprofit and you take on more and more services, it's pretty easy. And if they're not funded fully, and even if they are funded fully, it can cause a lot of stress to the organization. So I think you have to Learn how to say no. Strategy is the art of saying no.
Well, we are supported by Cinch Web Services, your best choice for WordPress support. We have a special offer for those who listen to this show. Cinch is the best choice you can make for WordPress and WooCommerce support. They're experts at solving all sorts of website issues, from big problems like fixing a completely broken site to the tiniest of details that are stumping you. Cinch offers ongoing support plans starting at just $99 a month, which covers all mandatory website maintenance tasks, plus 30-minute fixes for free. I personally use Cinch for my websites, and I can say that the support and expertise I've received from them is top-notch. They're great to work with, and I no longer need to worry about the health or status of our websites because Cinch is there for us. Now here's the best part. You can get 50% off your first month of support at cinchws.com/nonprofitleadership and just use the promo code leadership during checkout. Once again, that's cinchws.com/nonprofitleadership and use the promo code leadership for 50% off your first month of support. We want to thank Cinch for sponsoring our show and for being a reliable support team we can trust. Hey everybody, Rob here. Thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Show. If this is your first time listening to us, I wanted to make sure you're aware of a whole group of other interviews with fascinating guests that I've previously interviewed. Just go to our website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org, and there you'll find numerous interviews of nonprofit leaders from all over the country, even from different countries, all trying to make their world better. I think you'll really enjoy those interviews. We want to give you more content, and we'd like to get that information to you. And all you have to do is give us your email. When you go to that website, you can put your email address in that first box you'll see on the front page, and you'll be added to our monthly email update. In addition to some great content, you will see the latest podcast shows that will be actually sent right to your inbox. And that way you'll never miss any of the great content on this show. The other thing I'll mention to you is if you have questions or comments or you'd like to be on the show, do not hesitate to email me. I'd love to hear from you. Just do that through our website, my email, rob@ccofpc.org. Well, thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Now, as you've coached leaders over the years and grown in your own life as a leader, what are the key characteristics of leaders that who will be able to sustain effective leadership over a long period of time? I know you've written about this, you've talked about this. What separates out effective leaders who really prevail and those who fade away?
Well, it's the perennial leadership question. What are the attributes? What are the characteristics? What are the qualities of leaders? And it's hard just to say one thing, which is one of the reasons why Janice Cunning and I, we're the founders of Fundraising Leadership. We created an assessment. We did a lot of thinking that went into this assessment to sort of, and our work with nonprofit leaders over the years to sort of say, what are the essential qualities that we saw that successful leaders had, and we came up with about 9, and that's too many for us to talk about today. But one of the ones that I think is essential is having a positive mental attitude. This goes back a long way in the self-help world with Napoleon Hill, success through a positive mental attitude. Easy to say, very difficult to do, especially in the challenging environment that we're currently leading in, to maintain a positive mental attitude no matter what happens. Another way of saying that is seeing the gift or opportunity in any circumstance. That would be a way of framing a positive mental attitude, even the worst of circumstances.
Okay, now I want to go to a little bit more of a personal question. Who has shaped you most as a leader, and how did they influence you?
That's a great question. Whenever I think about there have been so many folks who have influenced me in my life, and I have to say my parents, Rob, and in different ways. My father, and in fact, he's no longer with us. He passed away a couple of years ago, and he was Stoic by philosophy. And so a lot of, and I wrote that little ebook to honor him, but a lot of his philosophy, way of looking at life, his patience, he had deep reservoirs of patience, something that I was born on got the bit of the short end of the stick on that one. More like my mom in this regard. You know, you talked about urgency. I tend to be, up until recently, more impatient. So I am remembering my father every time, especially now when there are lots of things out of my control. I'm cultivating my patience. And he also had a way of, he was very sort of warm and welcoming and very steady. And so I am more and more these days embodying those leadership qualities in my own work, and the collaborations that I have with our business partners and with our clients. And from my mom is like, if anyone out there in your audience knows the disc, my mom is like high D on the disc. You know, decisive, direct, and I share those qualities. She's also, she's still alive and in assisted living here in Southwest Florida. And she, had great qualities of planning and organization and could get things done. And those are some of the qualities we talk about in the assessment that I mentioned, for the audience. So, yeah, I think, you know, it's kind of quaint to say it these days, but my mother and father had the most influence on me in my life, and I really honor them and respect them and have very fond memories of them, even though, you know, they had their shortcomings.
I love hearing that you had such a wonderful upbringing, and to have your mom and dad both influence you like that is fantastic. I would say you're a very blessed man for that.
We're very different people, you know, in terms of their styles. My parents were very different people, so I feel like I try to embody the best of both of them. Yeah.
Well, do you feel like if you were to, I know this may be hard to do, but if you were to whittle down your dad's leadership influence and then say your mom's leadership influence, could you encapsulate that into like one statement of, this is the one key thing I took away from my dad and this is the one key thing I took away from my mom? Or is that too short a notice to let you ask you?
Well, yeah. Compassion and courage.
Oh, I like both of those. Both critical characteristics for leaders.
Definitely.
As you know, because I've told you a little bit about my podcast, my listeners the majority of them are active in some nonprofit and mostly on a staff position or in a key leadership role. You being a coach, of course, I'm wondering, I know you've written some articles, maybe there's some things you can kind of give a shout out to the things that you do. And of course, you're part of the Fundraising Leadership team, which you've already mentioned. You've got your own podcast. So perhaps talk a little bit more about how people can find out more about you, your coaching, and then, of course, your podcast. Yeah,
well, they can navigate over to fundraisingleadership.org, where they could pick up a number of, we've created a number of complimentary free resources for the nonprofit world. The assessment that I mentioned, a couple of ebooks on leadership that are all free, and there are a few other super low cost resources there for folks, including the podcast and the blog, which you were gracious enough to come on with us a few weeks back. We really appreciated your article and having you on. The thing I'm most excited about these days, Rob, is the mental fitness program we've put together. I mentioned it earlier in our discussion. You know, this work. It's a 7-week. It's like going to a boot camp, like a mental fitness boot camp for 7 weeks, if you think about it that way. That might scare some folks, but it really helps quiet those voices that cause stress in our lives and helps us shift over to those powers that I was mentioning that I have from my parents. More wisdom in general as a leader, just calm, clear-eyed action, decision-making, peacefulness in life in general. So that's the work that I'm most excited about, and they can find that under the coaching tab at fundraisingleadership.org if they're interested. in that mental fitness program. We're standing up another cohort in September.
Again, my guest today is David Langiulli. He's a certified professional coach, a leadership trainer, and a nonprofit board member. He also helps to lead Fundraising Leadership, an organization committed to helping grow nonprofit leaders. So, David, again, if people that are listening to the show really want to contact you, maybe get some coaching even, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Find me on LinkedIn. As you know, you and I are connected, and they want to follow me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of thought leadership in the realm of the nonprofit world out there, and could always email me at david@fundraisingleadership.org. And of course, becoming a member of the Fundraising Leadership community is completely free, and a whole bunch of complimentary resources will come your way when you join the community at fundraisingleadership.org.
That's excellent. Well, David, again, thank you for taking time to be on the show. Thanks for all you're doing. I mean, truly, you are investing in this next generation. You're investing in leaders who then, of course, are making a big impact across this country. So thanks for all you do. Again, I encourage my leaders to reach out to David and get to know him a little bit more. He's got a lot to offer.
Thank you, Rob. I want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing there in Park City, and I want to thank you for having me on the podcast to be able to share a little bit of what I've learned over the years with the audience.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Hey friends, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on both iTunes and Spotify. If you're wondering how to find it, just type in the words Nonprofit Leadership Podcast and this podcast should show up. We also encourage you, when you go on iTunes, let us know what you think. Give us a review. Give us a rating. We would love to hear what you think of this podcast, and your feedback will help expand this podcast to get it out to as many people as possible. You can also find other resources and interviews of past guests on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Again, that website is nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep making your world better.